Good afternoon, all of you. Can you hear me? At least my voice reaches you? Yeah, that's nice. So I told Bryce that I'll make sure that I don't sleep by standing and speaking, and then I can also check if any one of you are sleeping. But that's okay, I think. After a nice lunch, to have a small nap, it's okay. Well, my greetings to all the elders and the senior monks and all of you, and thank you for having me here, and thank you, Bryce, for inviting me here. It's really great, and I'm truly blessed to be in this holy land. I have only a few minutes, so I'll I think start on with what I wish to share with you this afternoon. My talk is particularly not on exploring harmony and happiness, but perhaps a couple of intricate questions which we have to deal with. Biology, philosophy, and psychology ask certain fundamental questions about human life. And the central point, or the central question which these disciplines ask, is about the experiencer, or the person who is behind the experiences. It's a little difficult for me to see from here, but that's why I'm getting a little slow. Well, on one side, we know that we have a self which is integrated most of the times, but then we also know that because our body is influenced by neurochemical inputs, our moods, our personality, they are bound to change. It's also interesting to see that what are the connections which runs through ourselves as an identity and the world which we experience. And it's very interesting to see that these connections are our awareness with which we live our daily life, our character as a whole, our ability to make choice making. We are all choice making individuals. Free will, we exercise our free will, moral agency, and our unique ways of experiencing. I think this is something which is very important. As unique individuals, we also have unique ways of experiencing. Well, friends, I want to start with 5 guiding questions, and perhaps I would end also with these 5 guiding questions. So what are these questions which I wish to share with you this afternoon? Is my inner awareness of myself separate from that of my body? Or to put it in very simple words, does the experience which you and I have, perhaps at this point, a nice feeling of having a full stomach and the cozy, cool breeze, or just the air in this room, does that belong to the body? Or does it belong to something else, for the time being, which we would like to call as the self? My second question, how does the inner self, because there is something which seems to be inner, make sense of the neural challenges and changes and create corresponding changes in the sensations and the subjective experiences we have? The third question, how does an organ like the brain, which is directed by neurochemical mechanisms, create the subjective intimacy of the self and experience? There's an intimate feeling about oneself and the experience which accrues to us, right? No one has to say that experience belongs to me and nobody else. Fourth question, what we talk about as larger issues which concerns humanity as a whole, perhaps not just humanity, as all living beings as a whole, which is well-being and the harmonious existence, depend upon a self which is integrated. And the fifth, which I think is a very fundamental question, which we may not have answer very soon, but a very interesting question to move forward. Can consciousness be scientifically explained? Well, friends, we know that when we talk about experience, it has to do with multiple levels of binding. And from multiple levels of binding, there is a confluence of all that information which is bound to give a sense of subjective experience. And in the process of this binding, there's also the inputs from memory and our own emotions, which are unique to us. But finally, we have a coherent, neat experience. Now, I wish to once again raise this issue with all of you, which is, can we distinguish between the senses of the body and the self? I know that some of you may think that perhaps that's not needed, but I think even as a philosophical exercise, it's important to see where does the sense of the body stop and where does the sense of the self start, even if you take a theoretical position. So what actually is the sense of the body? What do we mean by the body? The body is a combination of internal senses, right? Pain, balance in walking, balance in sitting, and so on. Thirst, hunger. And there are also other sensory modalities such as hearing, vision, taste, touch, and smell. This is something which is very much available to all of us, and we are all aware of it. There are also certain subtler physical capabilities which we may not be aware that these are also biological, and those two are the peripersonal space. Peripersonal space is the space which is comfortable at my arm's length. So if I'm able to talk to someone at my arm's length, that is my peripersonal space, which means I'm comfortable there. But if one crosses that space, that means there's something which perhaps is not correct, and my brain would interpret that there is something perhaps which I have to be alert about. Well, we can talk about it later, what exactly this is, but what peripersonal space has a lot to do with our daily life. The second idea, which again is very much bodily grounded, is proprioception, which is all of you and all of us know how much space we require in sitting in this seat, right? I don't fall down, nor do I get doubtful whether this chair has enough space to accommodate me in the next 20 minutes. So there's an intuitive sense which tells me the pressure which I need to exert to lift this bottle, if this bottle is half empty or if it's full. And it also tells me the space which I require when I see a chair. So this is something which is very intuitive, we all live with. But then there are situations where proprioceptive capability can go wrong, and your physical navigation and existence can be challenged. But that I think for another day. Our brain also forms several maps. Our brain is a good cartographer, a map-making machine, if I may put it. So it makes maps from all the experiences which we have, all the inputs we receive, and there is feed forward and feed backward mechanisms happening. So there's a lot of representation in your brain of all the activities, decision makings, and so on, which we do in a day-to-day life. Okay, apart from all this, I think the last, which is very important, is I know somehow that I own my body. Even if I say that I am more than my body, I am beyond my body, not even for a second I doubt that I own my body. But because if you doubt you own your body, you fall asleep on your chair and someone comes and wake you up, hey guy, get up, you're sleeping, you might say that, oh, why don't you get up for a change, right? That kind of response do not happen because it's even at the most difficult situation, you know that you own your body. Not only that you own your body, that you're also the agent of your actions. Intention comes from you. I'm also the agent of my actions. Well, can we say that the self sense is just an inner sense like the proprioceptive body sense? Perhaps what you call as the self, or a lot of discussion went in the morning about the I. Is that perhaps a subtler form of the proprioceptive sense, or maybe a combination of all the subtler and gross physical biological capabilities which we all have? I have a problem there, or at least I still have not reached that conclusion, and I think I'm far away from that conclusion, because I feel that whenever we talk about the I sense, the first and the last moments is not a thought, but it's not even a feeling, but it's a sense of something which is whole, something which is organic, and not necessarily as parts put together. And for this reason, my critique to a lot of work in cognitive sciences is that the sense of the self is not even a minimalistic sense, but it is organic and intense at any moment, even for a patient with proprioceptive difficulties. So self-sense perhaps can be described as a continuous presence of what? We don't know. And it's not even easy to articulate. But the only way we can say it, it's a continuous presence. Well, some of you would have read Feinberg's and others' work, and he and several others have pointed out that there's an unbridgeable gap between observing your brain in a feeling state and being oneself in the feeling state, and this gap only seems to increase. And most interestingly, the brain is insensate. Right? The brain has no sensory apparatus directed towards itself, doesn't feel hurt. But then, isn't it ironic that such an insensate brain creates all those complexly wired feelings unique to each one of us? What is the feel factor? Well, all that which we can say is that emotions and perhaps feelings are very important to carve our personal identities. Without emotions in us, others find it hard to understand what we are, what we say, and communicate with us. The bridge for social interactions is built by emotions, which play the role of narrators of physical, mental, and social health for oneself and for others. And I don't have to give you examples when there are challenges to your capabilities for expressing emotions or in social interactions. And it's also interesting that alongside we have the physical sensations, the feelings of what we have in our inside, these both are presented in a unified manner. And as unique individuals, we own and express different degrees of emotions. And thus, isn't it some of us are described as warm people and some others are a little slightly cold in their personality? Well, further, what is interesting about the self is that everything is not that happy about, think about it, because the boundaries of the sense of the self are flexible, at times contributing to great possibilities, like in spiritual experiences, meditative experiences. But there are also possibilities of worst existences in psychiatric and neurodegenerative situations. So it's interesting that it is the same self can be of a very transcendental and transformative nature, but at times it can be fractured and fragile. What I want to say next is too complex, but I would say that without going into any details, because I think people who are sitting beside me and in front of me are more qualified perhaps to understand what I'm saying. That what we talk about as the spiritual aspect of the self is beyond the binaries of good and bad. Well, what I was trying to share with you is that when we talk about self, we have to remember that there are two sides to it. One is the spiritual, the complex aspect about it, which is transformative and transcendental in nature. And the other side is where we see psychiatrically and neurologically challenged self, which finds difficult to sustain and particularly to deal with the sociocultural world. But then what is more interesting is that In spite of the difficulties encountered in a sociocultural world, even a psychiatrically and neurologically challenged self somehow finds a way of deriving meaning and purpose to life. So it looks like seeking purpose and thereby achieving meaning is very fundamental to human life and living. Well, let me revisit the 5 questions. This is to wake myself up and perhaps to wake yourself up to remember these 5 questions which we started a few minutes back. First, is my inner awareness of myself separate from my body? In other words, does the experience belong to the body or the self? Let's look at this question carefully. Perhaps the divide between the body and the self itself is an unstable idea, and subjective experience is to be understood beyond causal origins. Perhaps epistemologically, we are too obsessed with dealing with binaries and understanding complex issues through causal relations. The second question, how does self make sense of the neural changes and create corresponding changes in sensations and subjective experiences? Should we conceive the self as a networked, interconnected, and nested phenomenon that has physical as well as non-physical connections? Well, friends, as you would see that most of the questions, I would like to respond with another question because, it's an open-ended inquiry and we don't know whether we are near to any answers for these questions. The third question, how does the brain that is directed by neurochemical mechanisms create the subjective intimacy of the self and experience? A response, what we consider as biological or physical is also situated in culture. I think this is something which we have to remember. Perhaps we don't discuss about it much. It's situated in a culture and subtler realms of individual existence. Is the brain somehow connected to the core being of individual existence? We don't know. Can consciousness be scientifically explained? I know that this is a $1 million question. Yes, perhaps it can be explained from a functional standpoint, and I would like to underline that, from a capability standpoint, but not from the standpoint of its complexity that involves life and existence as an interconnected whole. And this is because science itself is a human initiative. It is not something which explains all about humans and human living. The next question, are well-being and harmonious existence dependent upon an integrated self, which we talked about a little bit in the morning session? Interestingly, the psychological health of an individual is dependent upon the way he or she projects and experiences a world outside and world inside. Well, time is okay. I think I have only a few more minutes. So, how many minutes? Okay, 2 minutes more. So I think I'll let me try what I can say in 2 minutes. Well, if you look at from the Indian philosophical traditions, there's various ways of understanding it. But one idea, including the Buddhist thought, is can we go beyond the binary in understanding something which is complex? I wanted to share with you an Upanishadic verse which says that the self has no apparatus which is directed towards itself, but it is outside. So you understand, experience the outside world much more clearly than your inner world. Well, so what are we up to? Beyond the rabbit hole, what do we have? I think 21st century consciousness studies is heading for a revolutionary progress in understanding brain, its magic, as well as understanding its anomalies. We also would create and augment spiritual well-being, holistic health, and explore new meanings for self and personal identity. So what are the 3 guiding E's? Explanation, we cannot escape from it because we have to explain what we are trying to understand. And in order to explain and in order to understand, there is more exploration needed, open-ended exploration. And the true exploration will not conclude without experiencing what we are exploring. Thank you so much.
Jilla Jishin Bishua Tamchit Lapi Chapong Shetoka Rere in Baina Natsun Tonsurki Zing Hoi Kaptidela Zig Zundu Nyambatan, the Navjanga Tutsurki, Ratui Kaptidela, Danyambundu, Samenika, Nyam to Tuchila, Muchi Jimsankari race. Matu Ziktang, Mushi Zintonatan. Nashiga Jatuani the Yong Shibachiri, Kanzina, Koroniga, Lapi Nifsheta Pareres, Chicta, Lapi Tandapton, Chicta, Tanda Natandama, Yetandira Duna Lapi Nifsheta Pareres. Yenayang, Koronia, Imji Goduna, Tuchiga Mewa de Jim Carretores.
So basically, I was thinking about asking two questions for you, but maybe I don't have enough time to ask two questions, so I will go for one question. So it's related with consciousness. When we talk about consciousness, and when we talk about consciousness from the neuroscience point of view, even though the information coming from your eye and ears can reach at the brain level simultaneously. You can have sound waves coming through your ear to the temporal area of the brain, and the vision information reaching at the back of your visionary cortex. But we do not have the experience of vision and sound at the same time. So what could be the reason why we don't experience one experience at the same time, simultaneously, even though two informations can come to the brain at the same time? So you can give explanations from the science point of view and also from your traditional philosophical point of view.
Well, from the science point of view, I guess there are more qualified who are perhaps with us to talk about, but there are examples about blind sight and similar phenomenon which talks about these kind of very peculiar experiences, but which can be, I think, explained using neural theories and so on. But I didn't actually quite follow your question. So why don't we have two experiences at the same time? Or?
So we can have a perception of a sound, and we can have a perception of a vision. So when we talk about vision and the sound, then the information from the objective level can reach at the brain level simultaneously. But we do not have the experience of it at one time.
Yeah, well, I think perhaps I need to understand this more perhaps from neuroscientists, but if we are talking about experience as a whole, I think our experience is whole at any point, right? Irrespective of the kind of information which we receive. So if the question is, though you see something and you're here at the same time, the experience is together, right?
So he's thinking that you can, even though the information of the sound and the vision can reach at the brain level, but you do not have the experience of both at the same time. So if you are seeing something and if your mental attention is diverted towards that vision, then even though the information of sound is coming into your brain, you are not consciously aware of that sound.
Well, I don't know if someone would like to help me, but I can only think of at this point perhaps a selective attention or something like that. Yeah.
I think that there's two maybe not so interesting answers to that question. The first one is human beings, our nervous system is visually dominant. We allocate more resources to our visual cortex and our higher order visual processing than we do to our auditory cortex. It's a more dominant perceptual pathway. We give more neurons and resources to vision. The second is the physical properties of the stimuli which our visual system is sensitive to and our auditory system is sensitive to. The spectrum of visual electromagnetic radiation is much faster, much higher frequencies than the spectrum of radiation or of sound waves which our auditory cortex is sensitive to. So the information hits our eyes much faster and much more quickly changes than the information that we get in our ears. So those are the two reasons why I think we see before we hear.
The Gela Koran, the Tadas Lemindura, Nada Gela Moran collectors love him and the Kesi, the ones that direct on Dishigagu, Benangalia, Dishigani, and Shambadans of what she is, Sumsro. The Gela Moran collectors love him, and that and the Moran had Karkosha love him, Kisi Nizu. Chick and a soda draging needs Yungu Yimbena, so the Yan Tongres, Drad Jail Sukri, Cassin Lavimena, Manzulebek Nalo Yimbena, Drad Tujiculation, Tonjiculation Naloni, and a Tonjiculation D, and a Chica Puga Tawada Dinalo, once a Tapuma, your Chetako, Chile, Jamba Yubik, and so the Mon Toya, the Drad Jail to Achigioris. The Ganashi, any Minea, Unia, Yoneki, any drag Nizuki, any Dadanzoya, any chick work. Unili yore any jig dragilap unu worky lab unu the Sudan Java you do some balcon go your riches and as making your tongue to resist the needle shillings that the Tana de Massine.
Netro de Gilal that are rejig revision of the Dada Namshikole administration. Karsegure Pege Dado Namshi Nivote any mode of the Ranjin to so cheaper. Chibaliang on Zinchigio, Yanata Dadon Carson, Namshi Nibode, Loa Loache, Dali, Namshi Chuan, Namshi Dali Chuan, and Dindigolea, and the Gonskari.
So, my question is related with self and the consciousness according to Vedic traditions. In Vedic traditions, what is the relation between self and the consciousness? Do they have the same definition, or one has a wider meaning and the other is the subcategory kind of it? And so how you define it?
Well, as you would know that the Vedic literature is quite huge, and so there has been divisions in Vedic literature. So we can't talk about one Vedic theory about self or consciousness. But perhaps if we take the Upanishads, which come at the end of the Vedas, well, there are lots of interesting dialogues that happens between teacher and students as narrated in Upanishadic stories. Perhaps one of the idea is that consciousness is something which is absolute and ultimate, and it cannot be reduced to anything else, even in experiential parameters. And self is understood again in a couple of different dimensions, and but then the true nature of the self is not something which is available through your experience, but something which is beyond experience. So to put it very simplistically, the Upanishadic theory of consciousness is more an absolutistic theory of consciousness, and self is identified, the true nature of self is identified with pure consciousness.
Rigjiki any shung kila chabiki and seni rodan dendere seachi share yomares. Koran shung nangol deshi gata mangbo yoresta imbin rigjiki ta shung sarshu dinzuk nangol pechen upanishad laj yor sigdo. Jaza di shung shisha chivimbina any sheba sidu zamba khar sigris lavimbana any dile chashi any yerumeviki any ta chujin chag yores. Any Tiganashi any dasia di kharchag yores lavimbina any di so any Kita ani gersusuk nyawada dewa yowach. Imbine ata dila ko tharak yawadu che yosar chikeja ani ta tawe ki rembek ton keja hi yungdu chambala ani chiga da sia dia ani sam ki michaba res ya chigda da sia di ani shebale los sha yo mare sia keja shi res like
근데 단 얘기 제와디 가상 가상 등어도 삽종체도 고소 언독제 연예상 휴 중송데 아니 당어서 laptop 보고 망체 제 충주가 없네 아니 제 로드 증량도 고소 안젤리 드와질라 안로 안차여로 젤리 드와드 롱가로 세 딘데니 로디 안 양도 좀라 딘데기 좋아지 무도스 아니 가상에 도스야 아니 제어당도 고소 아니 안디 디 노르데어레 안디 마레 안디 멤버게 등서 공개 딘데어레서 딘데야 가전능들 총송스 아니 디 지도 고소 땅아서 보고 먹고 싶어지게 아니 젤리 예발라 전에 차차고 용투고레 젤리 염라 전에 응아메고 저 용투고 그래서 딘데 먹고 싶어지 선도들 용되고 그래서 안 딘데 아니 사이언티스트 아니 디 컨텐츠는 사이언티스트 노르나스테 안 노르게 안달아직 아니 양데 캡종 체젠디 마리아 델레베단 테네도르서 아니 세게 컨텐츠 체바이나 디체가 안돌 서비스 고도 스케자
Caution may be not directly related with your talk, but it's related with something that he has experienced in the school. So normally in the school, children, they believe that there are different parts of the tongue which are responsible for testing different tastes. That means you have different taste receptor cells in different parts of your tongue. And but during my attendance at the workshop for the previous 1 month, teachers told me that this is a wrong concept. So still the children, they are having this wrong concept of taste and perception of taste related with the tongue. So what could be the source of this kind of misunderstanding or the misconception or the misinterpretation of something that is related with taste, and how you can explain this kind of mistakes?
I think my best explanation is that the tools that we have for science, for scientific examination, change over time. And the older understanding of different areas of the tongue being specifically sensitive to sweet or sour or salty was based on a less sophisticated tool for looking at the cells and the behavior of cells on the tongue. And as the technology and the tools become more sophisticated, we can understand more deeply, more closely, more richly what is happening in relationship between the taste buds or the cells on your tongue which are sensitive to chemicals in food and the experience of flavors. So it's just technology. That's my best answer to why we have something old that is not the right thing and something new that is closer to right. Probably even what we know today is not right, and that's why we have to keep doing science.
Well, the little I know about Ayurvedic literature, I think there are similar theories of experiencing different flavors from the different part of your tongue, and I think still I think the Ayurvedic practice is based on such understanding and such theories.
The Gelamorangi wanted to land the Chesa wanted to land the Kachin race Lavimbina, and Sering Sia di any Dig Jamjung Ribadi, any two rigs here, the Chadi Yore, Tiganashi, Dilla Seriki, Nyamshibla, Peju Chediaki, Yojedinzu Yargedu Yores. Yargin to do Zambala, and in Nezu Sawa Sawa Shingure, Nezu Sawa Sawa Shindu Zambala, Ngoma Yevek, Namsha Sigurin, Duzu Kaya Ruan D, and in Guatangu Dugu Yores, the Dig Pejik Dicha Yores, Tandik Tuzula, and Dinde, Ne Loa Loala, and the Ronyosa, Namonyosa, the Kurmonyosa, the Kaltinyosa, like the Kopsi Jatan, Namshati, nor the Yores Lana, nor the Yores. In a Tuzu Mangoji, Nona, the Dig the Yores. Chesata Tanda, Tuji, that is Yarji Shindu Zambala, Dinde Ramaimba, and Namonyo and Rochimbinata, the Chek, Samala Kalangasam, Chapdeva, Dinde, any Yungurelas. The Gelamorangi, Tanda Gaha gita so ribik shung dinzu nanglo la dinde any chik road dinzu manda nyongji ki any ta karo na wangbo di che kan la ne manda dus kopshe gyasha yore se ya ki dinde ki any samju chik yore las